Lorna Whitfield stood alone in front of the tall mirror in her bedroom, smoothing the front of her modest navy blue dress. It wasn't flashy. It didn't sparkle. No designer labels screamed for attention. But the fabric was perfectly tailored, the stitching flawless, and the cut timeless. At 65, Lorna had learned long ago that true power didn't need to announce itself. She adjusted the pearl brooch at her collar, not real pearls, at least not obviously so, and let out a slow breath. Outside the window, the sun dipped low, casting warm golden light across the rolling gardens of the venue she had chosen for her retirement party. Her retirement party. The word still felt strange. For over 40 years, Lorna had worked in silence, building something massive from nothing. She had never chased applause, never demanded recognition. She had let others take the spotlight while she remained comfortably in the shadows. And tonight she would finally step into the light. A soft knock came at the door. "Mom?" her son Daniel called. "Yes?" Lorna replied calmly. Daniel stepped inside, already adjusting his tie, his expression distracted. He looked around the room, the tasteful furniture, the antique desk, the art on the walls, and somehow still managed to see none of it. "You ready? People are already arriving." Lorna nodded. "I'll be down shortly." Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "Look, about tonight. Please don't make it awkward." Lorna raised an eyebrow slightly. "Awkward?" "You know," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Melissa's friends are coming. Some of my colleagues, too. It's kind of a mixed crowd." "I chose the guest list carefully," Lorna said evenly. Daniel forced a chuckle. "Right. Just try not to overshare, okay? We don't need another one of your stories." Her lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "Of course," she said. Daniel nodded, relieved, and left the room. The door closed softly behind him. Lorna stared at her reflection again, this time longer. Her eyes held decades of restraint, patience, and quiet endurance. "Just a little longer," she murmured to herself. The party begins. The venue was stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, white marble floors reflected soft golden lighting. Tall glass walls overlooked manicured gardens and a private lake beyond. Guests walked in slowly, heads turning, voices dropping. "Wow, this place is incredible. Who even owns this? I heard it costs a fortune just to book one night here." At the center of the room, Lorna stood near a simple table with refreshments, greeting guests with warmth and humility. She wore no badge of authority, no title, just a pleasant smile. Melissa, her daughter-in-law, arrived fashionably late. She swept in wearing a tight designer dress, heels clicking sharply against the marble, phone already in hand. She scanned the room and scoffed. "Oh my God," she whispered loudly to Daniel. "This place is so extra." Daniel shrugged. "It's her retirement. Let her have her moment." Melissa leaned closer. "With whose money?" Daniel laughed quietly. "Probably her savings. You know how she is. Cheap all her life, hoarding pennies." Melissa smirked. Sad, honestly. They approached Lorna. "There she is," Melissa said with a forced smile. "The guest of honor." Lorna turned. "Melissa, I'm glad you came." Melissa glanced at Lorna's dress, her brooch, her shoes, judging, calculating. "That dress is brave," said Melissa sweetly. "Very vintage." Daniel chuckled. Lorna tilted her head. "Thank you." Melissa sipped her champagne. "So, Mom, what exactly are you retiring from again? You've always been a bit vague." "I prefer my privacy," Lorna replied. "Of course you do," she rolled her eyes. "Of course you do." She leaned toward one of her friends nearby. "She's always been like this, very secretive, very dramatic." Her friend laughed. She acts like she ran some empire, but let's be honest, she lived modestly her whole life, probably just jealous seeing us enjoy the fun. For a long moment after Richard Hale's words, no one moved. No one breathed. The chandeliers still glowed, the music still played softly in the background, but the room itself seemed frozen, suspended in a single unbearable second. Melissa's lips parted, but no sound came out. C.O.? She finally whispered, barely audible. No, that's not. Daniel stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time in his life. You never said, he began. Lorna lifted one hand gently. I wasn't finished being useful yet, she said calmly, so I didn't retire publicly. Richard smiled. That's putting it modestly. He turned to the guests. Miss Whitfield stepped back from daily operations years ago, but she never stopped owning everything. Everything. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Melissa laughed nervously. This is a joke, right? She looked around, searching for someone, anyone, to confirm it was some elaborate prank. No one met her eyes. Her friends shifted away from her, suddenly uncomfortable. One of them whispered, Melissa, I think it's real. Melissa's hand tightened around her glass. Daniel, she hissed, say something. Daniel swallowed hard. Mom, his voice cracked, is this true? Lorna looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had when he was a child, lying about broken windows or missing homework. Yes, she said. Simple, final. The reveal. Richard gestured toward a nearby screen. If you'll allow me, he said. With a subtle nod from Lorna, the screen lit up. Logos appeared. Luxury hotels, event centers, commercial real estate, logistics companies, tech startups, each bearing the same parent name, Whitfield Group. Murmurs exploded into full-blown shock. That's impossible. They're worth billions. I've worked with them. Melissa's knees felt weak. She grabbed Daniel's arm. This can't be the same Whitfield. Lorna spoke again, her voice steady. I started with a single auto parts warehouse, she said. No investors, no safety net, just discipline. She paused. And silence. Her eyes flicked to Melissa. Silence keeps people honest. Melissa opened her mouth, but Lorna continued. I let my son believe I was comfortable. I let my daughter-in-law believe I was insignificant. She turned fully toward them now. And in doing so, I learned exactly who you were. Daniel's face burned. I didn't know, he said quickly. I swear I never knew. Lorna nodded. No, you never asked. The mask falls. Melissa's voice rose, sharp and brittle. So what? You're rich. Congratulations. She forced a laugh. Why hide it? Were you testing us or something? Lorna smiled faintly. No. She stepped closer. I was protecting myself. From what? Your own family? Yes, Lorna said. The word landed like a slap. Melissa bristled. That's ridiculous. We've always treated you fine. Lorna tilted her head. Have you? She turned to the crowd. Do you know, she asked softly, that my daughter-in-law once called me a burden for needing a ride to a doctor's appointment? Melissa flushed. That was one time. That she referred to my cooking as cheap old people food, Lorna continued. Daniel stared at the floor. That she told guests in my own home that I was jealous of her lifestyle. Melissa snapped. I was joking. Lorna met her eyes. Jokes reveal truth when power is uneven. The room was dead silent now. The accounting. Lorna turned to Richard again. Please read the list. Richard nodded and pulled out a tablet. Over the last 6 years, Ms. Whitfield has provided financial support to her son's household in the form of, he scrolled, Mortgage assistance, business bailouts, credit card settlements, vacation reimbursements, private school tuition. Daniel's head snapped up. What? Richard looked at him. You thought those checks came from an anonymous trust? Daniel's face drained. The music resumed inside the hall, but the mood had shifted. People laughed again, glasses clinked, conversations restarted, yet nothing felt the same. Lorna could feel it. The air itself carried a new weight, respect, caution, awe. She stood near the window overlooking the lake, watching the ripples spread across the water. Funny thing about ripples, she said quietly to Richard, who stood beside her, you never see where they end. Richard nodded. You handled it with restraint. Lorna smiled faintly. Restraint is just patience that learned how to speak. A different kind of attention. Guests approached her differently now. Executives who had once nodded politely now waited their turn. Former partners praised her foresight. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice, their voices careful, reverent. Yet none of it stirred her. What stayed with her was Daniel's face, not the shock, not the fear, but the absence of recognition. The moment a son realizes he never truly knew his mother. She felt no triumph, only closure. Outside, the fall. Across the city, Melissa sat in silence on the leather seat of the car. Her phone buzzed. Bank alert. Transaction declined. Again. She slammed the phone down. This is insane. Daniel stared out the window, jaw tight. You shouldn't have said those things, he muttered. Melissa snapped. Don't you dare. You laughed too. He flinched. I didn't know, he said again. She turned on him. You never know anything. You never ask questions. You just assumed your mother was small. The words stung. Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered birthdays she skipped to work late, holidays she left early, the cheap coats, the quiet car. 3 days later, Lorna's assistant placed a message on her desk. Daniel Whitfield called multiple times. Lorna stared at the note for a long moment. Not today, she said calmly. That evening, she walked through one of her oldest warehouses, the first one she ever bought. Dusty concrete floors, faded numbers painted on steel beams. This was where she learned who she was. Not a mother, not a wife, a builder. Memories. She remembered Daniel at 7, asking why she worked so much. She remembered Melissa at 25, smiling sweetly the first year, colder the next. She remembered the moment she realized silence was safer than honesty. Power attracts hunger. Hunger devours respect. The second call. A week passed, then another call. This time, Daniel left a voicemail. Mom, I don't want money. I just want to talk. Lorna listened to it twice. She didn't delete it. She didn't answer. The consequences. Melissa's world collapsed quietly. Credit cards frozen, friends stopped calling, invitations disappeared. One by one, the luxuries vanished, replaced by the uncomfortable weight of self-awareness. At night, she replayed the party in her head. The laughter, the word tacky, the way Lorna didn't flinch. For the first time, Melissa wondered if she had mistaken silence for weakness. The meeting. A month later, Lorna agreed. A cafe, neutral ground. Daniel arrived early, older, smaller. She sat across from him, hands folded. Say what you came to say, she told him gently. I failed you, he said. I treated you like you were less. Lorna nodded. Because it was convenient. Tears filled his eyes. I want to fix it. She studied him. You can't fix what you never valued. He swallowed. Is there any chance? No, she said softly, but there is a path. Hope flickered. You live without my money, you build something honest, then we talk. Daniel nodded. It was the first time she saw humility instead of entitlement. Melissa's letter. Weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived. No perfume, no fancy paper, just words. I see now that I mistook your silence for insignificance. I don't ask for forgiveness, only that you know I understand. Lorna folded the letter. Understanding, she knew, often arrives too late to change outcomes, but not too late to change people. The final act begins. At her next board meeting, Lorna stood. I'm funding a new program, she said, for women who built quietly and were dismissed loudly. The day Lorna officially retired, the city woke up differently. Newspapers carried her story on the inside pages, not as gossip, not as scandal, but as history. A woman who built an empire without noise, a leader who never demanded applause, a mother who chose dignity over approval. Morna didn't read the articles. She was already somewhere else. The house by the water. She moved into a quiet lakeside home, smaller than her estates, simpler than her offices. No staff, no drivers, just morning light, bird song, and the sound of water touching stone. Every morning she made her own tea, not because she had to, because she could. She walked slowly now, not from weakness, but from choice. Time was no longer something she chased. It waited for her. Daniel's long road. Daniel struggled, not dramatically, not publicly, but honestly. He sold the house he never earned, took a job beneath his old title, learned what it meant to finish something without rescue. Months passed, then years. He sent updates, not requests. Lorna read them all. She replied rarely. When she did, her messages were short, proud, measured, real. Melissa's silence. Melissa disappeared from the social circles she once ruled. She worked, really worked, and for the first time, no one cared who she married. That truth changed her more than punishment ever could. She never wrote again, and Lorna never needed her to. The foundation. The Whitfield Quiet Builders Initiative launched quietly, just like its founder. No galas, no speeches, just funding, mentorship, and freedom. Women who had been ignored, women who had been underestimated, women who learned that silence was not the absence of power, but its preparation. The last visit. On a cool autumn afternoon, Daniel stood at Lorna's door. No gifts, no excuses, just time. They walked by the lake, spoke of small things. At the end, Lorna stopped. You know, she said, wealth never protected me. Daniel nodded, but it gave me the freedom to walk away from disrespect. She placed her hand over his. That's the only inheritance that matters. The final scene. Years later, at another event in the same grand venue, a young woman whispered to her friend, "Who's that elderly woman?" The friend smiled. "That's Lorna Whitfield. She owns everything." Lorna heard them. She smiled, not because she was recognized, but because she no longer needed to be. The lights dimmed, the music rose, and somewhere in the quiet, power rested.